studies, accommodations. Basically, when interpreters are needed, they're either hired from SAC, because that's our on-campus, interpreter agency, whatever you want to refer to it as. Sometimes PI, if it's a situation that Heather Ford cannot interpret in, for example, staff meetings, she's considered a part of the staff, so she would actually have to be involved in the meeting, which would mean, obviously she can't interpret now because it's dual roles. So for something like that, they would hire, someone from PI. If someone from SAC couldn't do it, again, schedules and flexibility. Another accommodation I put down up here is this thing we like to call deaf space, which occurs here on the 6th floor in Enders Hall. Basically, what all the instructors refer to it as is it's just having respect for all the deaf individuals on this floor and making sure that any type of communication that's happening on the floor is accessible. Doesn't matter if you're ASL 1 or ASL 6 or you took all the classes already and you're ASL God or Goddess. You still have to try and use what you know, because that's really just the environment here. And if you talk to any of the instructors, they'll say, this is the one spot on campus where everybody knows my language, where I can actually speak and use my language, whereas if I walk, to the building across the street, oh, I'm in the hearing world again. Nobody over here knows sign language, so that's really a big part of it. They're currently trying to make like this artsy visual picture of deaf space. They're trying to find someone to design kind of what it looks like so that it could be handed out to like ASL 1 students so they can better understand the concept.
So now the role of interpreter is quite different than what their role of interpreters, like the situations that they had. Here at METC, there was no real mission statement. There was no vision statement per se. But one thing they do emphasize is that we match individual communication modes for every student. Also, they highlight every time a student comes to METC, they are forced to sign they are required to sign a contract that states that interpreters will not interpret exams. You have to be able to read and understand the exams and comprehend them without interpreter helping you out. The only exception to this is if you have, for example, Deaf Plus, if you have additional disabilities and it's written in your contract with them, that is the only way that they will flex that rule.
Okay, so now we'll discuss roles here at UWM a little bit. I'm going to focus on my part, which is ASL Studies. Basically, my site advisor, who again was Marika, she's ASL Studies Program Coordinator, and she also is an instructor. It's interesting because all the other instructors kind of look to her as the lead because she is the program coordinator, although a lot of times she's like, no, we're all, equals, and kind of like in meetings, though. Interesting thing, they'll set the table up in a circle, obviously, so everybody can see each other, but not only that, like, she's very concerned with one table being considered, like, where the head person sits. Like, she doesn't want to sit there, because everybody always looks to her, for all the solutions or all the ideas and stuff like that. She really encourages everyone to work together as a team, so it's really awesome to see that. And then, again, my role as intern, I was kind of like the staff, quote-unquote, interpreter for the instructors, because anytime they needed an interpreter for anything, they'd come to my office, hey, are you busy? No, what? What do you need? Yeah, I can come interpret, just, do whatever they want, pretty much. And yeah, it's good. Again, I was TA for 3 classes. Those are ASL 1, ASL 3, and ASL Lit. And sometimes within some of those classes I would interpret as well, like on and off. Mainly ASL 1, if like the students really were not understanding something. It's like, okay, voice real quick. Voice, da-da, done. Okay, we're going back to all sign now. And yeah.
Heather, her role is mainly an advisor position. I know we kind of think of her as our ITP advisor and that's all we're really focused on, but she does have more programs that she works with. ASL studies, which you probably all figured, but there's also the ASL teacher education and the early adolescence program. I didn't put it on here, but there's also an autism certificate now that you can get, and she runs that as well. She does interpret classes on a regular basis, although she's technically an advisor.
No, she's a slash position.
Slash?
Oh yeah, that is her job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I knew it was part of her job, but
Mhm.
we all think of her, I guess, as an advisor because that's her main role with us.
Mhm.
But she does interpret at least 4 classes, I know, on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's part of her contract.
She also helps coordinate the class schedules with on the 6th floor between all the ASL classes and all the different schedules for the instructors for those classes. It's hard to kind of lock down rooms for everything, so she is involved within that. She's also the staff leader for the living learning community in the dorm. So that floor is all people who are learning sign language. To be on that floor, you're required to be either taking ASL 1 or 2, depending on the semester, if it's fall or spring, and deaf culture or deaf history. So the goal is that everybody on that floor is kind of learning the same language and they can really practice and develop those skills together. And as I mentioned before, Heather also coordinates interpreters if the position can't be filled within the UWM staff.
Okay, so for MAPC, why am I having issues saying that? The qualifications to be able to work at this school, it's pretty similar to a lot of other schools. All interpreters currently though that work at MAPC are NIC certified. In the past they have hired their former interns, but they were always teamed with NIC professionals and they were always in environments that weren't advanced or too challenging for that situation.
Okay, ASL studies program. Starting out, I know this just based on some interviews I've had with instructors, but really there was no like strict on paper qualifications to become an instructor, other than obviously they wanted their instructors to be deaf and to know the ASL language and to have a firm grasp on it. But nowadays they currently are working to require everyone to have the ASL TA certificate, which basically says I've taught with a mentor in a classroom for so many hours, and so now I'm able to teach on my own type of thing. It's kind of like what CDIs go through with the having a mentor and having so many hours. And they also are working to require instructors to have a master's degree and also adding an interview process. Basically, you get interviewed before you get hired, which I know some of the instructors I spoke to, they didn't even have that. They said they just applied and bam, you got the job, and some of them wished that maybe they did have an interview process so that you can kind of build that rapport with whoever's hiring you and just kind of build a relationship and get to know the person.
For Heather Ford, when she hires interpreters, she likes to hire freelance interpreters rather, not related to an agency. Obviously that's not always possible, but when I was talking with her about this, she came up with the grow your own interpreters kind of philosophy. And obviously to work you have to have your license, but what she likes to do is take people that she's worked with, past interns, or anybody that she knows that has a skill to be put in that position that she needs filled, and she gets them to come in based on the schedule. So she really does prefer working with people that she's worked with before, that she's helped mentor, that she knows, and then she will call an agency if necessary, and it's not like she doesn't like calling agencies, but it's nice to kind of get a taste of everyone, if that makes sense.
Okay, so a little bit about my experience at MATC. It was a fabulous experience. I absolutely loved this placement. Everyone who I worked with was so friendly. All the consumers were so flexible. I got such a wide experience, different than what I've ever had before, and it was absolutely just a great experience. Overall, I primarily did 5 classes, but it's hard to really say that because I was also considered the flex person. For example, there were instances during the winter where the freelance interpreter from Milwaukee would get stuck, where a car would break down or some sort of situation, so I would get a text from Jana when I'm on my way to physics, and she'd be like, oh, you're going to this class instead. And I'm like, okay, so I would just go into that class. So I was really pulled from a lot of different situations. I did advisor meetings, I did writing center, I did yoga, I did a hairstyling class. So there was a whole bunch of different things that I was just placed into. But if it wasn't for that, I did primarily 5 classes where I did team or solo interpret with a person observing me. Overall, I worked with 4 interpreters, the 2 staff interpreters, 1 purple, and 1 freelance. So for all the classes I had, I rotated between those 4 individuals. One of the biggest things I got to observe that I've never seen before was the coordinating aspect. As we all know, as students, we drop classes last minute, or we add classes last minute, or we have a huge paper due, so we have to go to the writing center. So how it worked at MATC, besides the primary classes, if you had some sort of extra thing, talking to an advisor or the writing center or any kind of thing like that, the students had to text Jana. So she would get these random text messages throughout the day while she's interpreting, and somehow she has to find interpreters for those students while she's still interpreting. So her role, other than an interpreter, was a coordinator, and she was the only person who did it. I was amazed watching her be able to juggle all this at the same time. She worked very closely with Purple, and they know her, how sometimes it's last minute requests. They do rank up their price for last minute requests, but they always were dependable for her. They always showed up with a person, even if it was a 30-minute, like, oh, I have 30 minutes to find an interpreter, Purple was always there for them. So it was great to see, but sometimes I felt stressed for her. Again, I did a couple advisor meetings, which are also interesting because the advisor meetings, some advisors had little to no experience with deaf individuals, so you kind of had to educate in that kind of environment. They didn't really understand why there was 2 of us in a classroom with me being the intern, but why was the intern interpreting, or it was kind of tricky in some situations, so I got to learn those kind of skills of how to like communicate with people who don't really know what or why I'm there. And again, there was a variety of different things. Students would sometimes come up to us and just in a social environment, they would come have lunch with us, tell us about what things they would like to see, how to, for me, they gave me a lot of feedback. I've never really had consumers in the past tell me more feedback about my interpreting, but these consumers were great with that. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they weren't just primarily right out of high school, they were coming back. I also interpreted for a CDI, which she works a lot with interpreters, so I got some amazing feedback from that individual, and it was really a good experience.